Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of February of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with the Kupiansk front line. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of artillery duels and airstrike attacks from the Russian side, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles. The front line is stable, there are just heavy duels and clashes all over the front line, but that's it. Now let's talk about Liman front line. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians lost 140 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems, 1 Gvozdika and 1 D-20 howitzer. As you can see, the level of losses of Ukrainians in this area are still high. That means that the Russians still continue support offensive operation in this area with one purpose: to freeze and pin down the Ukrainians' reserves in this area and not to allow the Ukrainians to redeploy these forces in the vicinity of Bakhmut. Meanwhile, the Russian forces in Bakhmut continue their offensive operation, and today they achieve another more success in this area. Now let's talk about Bakhmut. As you can see, according to this map, there are a lot of changes in this area. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of storm operation in this area, the Ukrainians lost 250 soldiers, 11 armored vehicles including 2 tanks and 1 artillery system D-20. If you remember, yesterday, the day before yesterday, we discussed the losses of Ukrainians on this front line, and the Russians reported that on the 25th of February the Ukrainians lost just 120 soldiers. Yesterday they lost 100 soldiers in this area. When talking about the 24th of February, the Ukrainians lost 240 soldiers, and today 250 soldiers. So a little bit less than 1,000 soldiers per 4 day. But this is not the most important. The most important is that during the previous 2 days the Wagners took a small operational pause in this area for regrouping, for completing the clearing operation of Berkhovka, Yagidne, to clear and to solve all issues with Dubovo-Vasilievka, to develop their progress in the south of Berkhovskaya water reservoir in direction of Bogdanovka. During those previous 2 days they were doing this thing. Furthermore, don't forget that during the retreat process of the Ukrainians from Yagidne, they destroyed this dam, and this area was flooded by the water, and that situation completely slowed down the Russians and they couldn't develop their offensive operation further. But now, as far as I understand, and also the military experts were saying that in a day or in 2 days this water will go out from this area, and then the Russians, the Wagners, would be able to proceed and continue their offensive operation. Today some Russian sources on the ground, military experts on the ground, reported that the Russians complete the entire clearing of railroad station Stupki of this block that located on the north of Bakhmut. This is exactly the area that was damaged and flooded by the water as a result of the explosion in this dam. So maybe the Ukrainians were trying to use that situation to retreat and step back from this area without losses, and as I understand they were pretty successful with that. But anyway, they stepped back inside of Bakhmut, and the north is under complete Russian control. If you take a look at the Western sources map, this map has been updated, and they show that the north part is already under Russian control. Yagidne and Berkhovka as well under Russian control. There are a lot of questions about Dubovo-Vasilievka, about the bridgehead between the railroad and this Berkhovska water reservoir. So this is 2 most important bridgeheads and ground on the storm operation of Bakhmut. Why is that? First of all, one more time, during the previous 2 days the Russians were doing some kind of regrouping, and if you remember, we discussed many times this area between water reservoir and this railroad, that this is very important part, because along the railroad and along these brushes the Russians are able to move as far as possible in direction of Bogdanovka and to get this area, and from this area they will be able to establish physical control over this turn of the road that connects Chasov Yar and Khromovo. And some Ukrainian sources are saying that the Russians have already established this control, and at least today I saw maybe 2 or 3 video and photo confirmation of destroyed vehicle, Ukrainian destroyed vehicle along this road as a result of Russian attack from these brushes and these forest lines and artillery attacks. So this area is already cut by the Russians. But this is not the most important. First of all, let's update this map, and let's update this map according to the information we have for today, and according for 27th of February, the Russians still haven't established control over Dubovo-Vasilievka, because as you can see, the Russian source map hasn't been updated. Some Russian military experts are saying that this town is on the Russians. Other military experts on the ground are saying that this town is still on the Ukrainian, or at least in the gray zone. So today, in today's update, let's assume that this town is still under Ukrainian control. So let's update this map according to the situation we have. And according to the situation we have, this is the real situation in on the front line. And why I'm updating this map, I'll try to explain to you. One more time, let's add the colors. So this is the bridgehead that the Russians have on the north of Bakhmut, and the most important part is this one. There is a railroad. This area is completely protected from the north and from the south, so that means that if the Russians are able to send some storm groups in this area, and if they are able to protect them, of course they are able to use just an infantry, and if this infantry is experienced and they can, let's say, find a solution how to protect themselves against the artillery attacks and something like this, of course this bridgehead is very dangerous for the Ukrainians. This area is located on the lowland, and this is the only benefit that Ukrainians that located in Bogdanovka and Grigorievka have in comparison with the Russians that located on this bridgehead between the water reservoir and the railroad. But what did happen today? First of all, let's take a look at the Russian sources map, and you're going to see 2 important icons. This one. The first one are saying that according to the Russian sources, the Russians started storm operation of Bogdanovka. To tell the truth, this operation, I didn't expect this expression. It wasn't unexpected for me. I didn't thought and I didn't suppose that the Russians would try their luck and they would attack in direction of Bogdanovka. I was really surprised by that attack. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that during that storm operation, the Ukrainians were trying to send some reserves from Grigorievka in direction of Bogdanovka. I believe that Ukrainians also didn't expect that operation. I believe that they expected that the Russians would try to attack in direction Dubovo-Vasilievka, Orekho-Vasilievka in this area, or maybe in direction of Grigorievka, but the Ukrainians didn't expect the attack in direction of Bogdanovka. So that's why the Ukrainians sent their reserves from Grigorievka in direction of Bogdanovka. Let's return back to the Western sources map. This is Grigorievka, and this is the road. You see this road that Ukrainians are able to use to support this town, and they are able to keep forces. They're pretty much far from the main theater of war, but from the other side they are able to manipulate and to send reserves to the north to Orekho-Vasilievka, or to send reserves to Bogdanovka. And the Ukrainians from Grigorievka send the reserves using this road in direction of Bogdanovka with one purpose: to stop the Russian storm operation that took place during the previous 24 hours. And as I understand, the Russians spotted that, and they discovered the Ukrainians' plans, and they attacked this area, this convoy, with artillery. And some Russian sources on the ground are saying that a lot of Ukrainian armored vehicles and infantry got under artillery fire, and as a result they had a lot of losses. The Russian sources haven't published any real numbers. I believe that we will see them, or we will get them tomorrow or the day after. But anyway, as you can see, the Russians started storming of Bogdanovka. There were no more updates about whether they were able to get the northeast part of that town, whether they were able to establish bridgehead here or not. I don't know, but anyway, this is the fact that took place during the previous 24 hours. I believe that the Russians managed to develop the bridgehead. At least they managed to continue developing their positions along the forest lines and the brushes, and maybe they are somewhere in the outskirts of this town. But if the Russians entered Bogdanovka. Believe me, they won't go back, and they will try to develop, and maybe Bogdanovka is going to fall even earlier than Ivanovsk or any other town on Bakhmut front line. And this area is very important for the Russians, because if the Russians are able to establish control over Bogdanovka, the most important thing, the Russians will be able to establish control over the landfills, over the hills in this area, and they will be able to take the highest hills in this area. Let's take a look at Bogdanovka. So this is Bogdanovka, and this hill is pretty far from the Russians, 240 meters. I'm not sure that this town even in the hill, but anyway, if the Russians are able to gather and to cross this small village in direction of the channel, then the Russians would be able to cut the road physically and establish fire control, visual control over this road, and maybe they will be able even to cut the road that connects the small town canal with Chasov Yar, and after that the Russians maybe would try to storm and to take control over this small block. I'm not sure about this, but maybe this is the plan, and then we can say about the final encirclement, surprise encirclement of Bakhmut and the area and the vicinity around the Bakhmut as well. So that was a very crazy attack, but and the Ukrainians didn't expect that attack, and as a result of that attack, maybe the Russians managed to establish some bridgehead in the northeast part of this small town Bogdanovka. Let's wait a little bit. I believe that if they were successful tomorrow, we will see this in the morning updates or something like this. When talking about the south, the Russians also had some progress in this area. Some Russian sources are saying that as a result of clashes in the south, the Russians managed to enter the west part of Bakhmut, the area of airport, and to establish bridgehead in this area. So they're trying to cut Bakhmut and to encircle Bakhmut from many sides, and to reduce the possibility of Ukrainians in this town to resist and something like this. But you know that some Russian sources are saying that and it's normal, it's obvious, and we understand this, that Wagner's have losses, and they had losses during the previous offensive operations. I'm not sure about their reserves, how long they are able to support this level of attack. I hope they have enough of forces to encircle Bakhmut, or at least to establish real positions, and from which they will be able to block Bakhmut, and within a month or a few weeks to establish control over entire town. But I think that Wagner's can't support this attack within the next months, 2 or 3 months. I believe that they have almost finished with their reserves. I think it's just my feelings. Nobody has the numbers, the real numbers, but we understand that it's highly unlikely that the Wagners are able to support such a pressure for a very long time. And everybody understand, and the Ukrainians also, they are out of reserves. They have a very powerful army in Zaporizhzhia, near Dnipro, in Odessa region, on Kharkiv front line, but they also don't want to use those reserves, because they understand that every single minute the Russians are able to attack from those front lines as well. So situation is very complicated, but I believe that Wagners are able to complete this mission. And let's see, because I believe that within the next few days they will be able to take more towns, more blocks in this area, and after that, maybe by the end of this weekend, we're going to talk not about operational or tactical encirclement of Bakhmut. We're going to talk about the real cauldron in this area. Maybe the Ukrainians, if the Ukrainians loses Bogdanovka, maybe they will take a decision to step back from Bakhmut. Nobody knows. So, but anyway, soon the situation will be resolved by the parties. Now let's move further to Donetsk. There are also a lot of interesting updates. As you can see, Donetsk is under very heavy fire. Today, the DPR authorities published some kind of statistics, and they're saying that during the past year, the citizens, around 4,500 citizens of DPR were killed as a result of clashes by the Ukrainian side, as a result of artillery attacks and so on. Up to 4,500 people, including 132 kids, were killed as a result of Ukrainian artillery attacks. Not just DPR, but also by attacking, let's say, Volnovakh, Tokmak. Tokmak is not under DPR control. Grigorievka, these towns that located in Severodonetsk agglomeration, but it's LPR. Let's say Bakhmut, Gorlovka, and so on. So as you can see, the losses among civilians are very high. When talking about Avdiivka, there are no changes on the ground. The Russians developed their bridgehead during the previous days, but now they stopped. Maybe they're doing some regrouping or trying to calculate or trying to plan the further steps, but for now there are no changes. The same situation on the Peski front line, there are no changes as well. The Russians, according to the previous information we got, they established control over the hills on the north of Vadiana, but there are no more progress in this area. When talking about Marinka, just some soldiers on the ground, officers on the ground, published video and photos of clashes in this area. Today there were piece of news that the Russians managed to got another blocks in central part of Marinka, but that as you can see, around 30% of these towns still remains under Ukrainian control. When talking about Vuhledar, today we can say that today is the first day when we start receiving not very positive piece of news for the Russians from this front line. The Ukrainians launched their counter-offensive operation in this area in direction of Nikolsk, in direction of residential area, in direction of this small square that encircled by the forest lines, and the Ukrainians are pretty successful according to information I have. The Russians are retreating and slowly, but they're stepping back. We'll see anyway. Maybe this is some kind of speculation, because it wasn't unexpected. Of course, we understand that during the previous storm of Vuhledar, the Russians were defeated and they didn't achieve. Maybe the Russians didn't achieve maybe they managed to develop the bridgehead, but the price they pay for that didn't worth the bridgehead they established control over. And now the Ukrainians launched their counter-offensive operation and they're pushing the Russians back, and some sources are saying that the Ukrainians are not planning to just to push the Russians from the ground that they managed to establish control over during the previous counter-offensive operation. Some sources are saying that Ukrainians are planning to, it's just some kind of a beginning, preparation before the greatest Ukrainian offensive operation, and the real plan that Ukrainians are trying to implement is to attack in direction of Volnovakha. So now they're trying to penetrate and reduce the first defense line of the Russians in Pavlovka, Mykolaiskaya, Volodymyrivka, Blagodatnaya, and if the Ukrainians are able to do this, the main goal in the main direction is Volnovakha, and and this will allow the Ukrainians to cut supply between DPR and Mariupol and Zaporizhzhia. The Russians will be forced to make a very big hook to supply this area. So by this attack, the Ukrainians are able to cause a lot of logistics problem for the Russians. And after that, the Ukrainians, of course, will launch the main attack in direction of Tokmak, Melitopol and Tokmak. So this attack in direction of Volnovakha is support operation. It's the same thing as we can see on Liman front line. The Russians attacks in Liman without any significant progress on the ground, just with one purpose: to pin down the Ukrainians' reserves in this area, to increase the losses and so on, and not to allow the Ukrainians to move reserves from, let's say, Yampol for Serebryanka forest in direction of Bakhmut. The same situation that now the Ukrainians are trying to do here. They attack in direction of Vuhledar, and then they will try to develop their offensive operation in direction of Volnovakha, just with one purpose: to freeze and pin down the Russians forces in Donetsk and not to allow them to regroup in direction of Tokmak, Melitopol. The only possible way for the Russians to support this area is through Crimea and the Crimea bridge. Maybe the Ukrainians are planning to do something with Crimea bridge one more time, and after that they will launch their offensive operation in direction of Tokmak. There are very big Ukrainian fists in Dnipro and Zaporizhzhia, and most of the Ukrainian tanks are accumulated in this area. Armored vehicles, tanks, and so on, everything that can be sent and that can support the offensive operation in direction of Zaporizhzhia area. The Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 95 soldiers and 8 armored vehicles, including 1 tank. on Zaporizhzhia and South Donetsk area. As you can see, when talking about every single front line, the Ukrainian losses have been increased. That means that they also activated their movements. We just need to wait a little bit. I believe that the next few weeks is going to be one of the most important, that will determine the situation, and that will determine the beginning and the entire configuration of the spring military company in this campaign, in this special military operation. When talking about Kherson area, the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes and artillery duels in Kherson area during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems D-30. Furthermore, the Russians destroy another ammo depot of 63rd Mechanized Brigade in this area. As you can see, the level of losses of the Ukrainians are very high in this area. And why is that, and why is this so important? If you take a look at the Russian sources map, you're gonna see that there is an icon in the vicinity of there are a few icons on the border with Pridnestrovia, and the Ukrainians continue collecting their forces. And to tell the truth, the Ukrainians are ready. They're ready. The Ukrainians complete their part of offensive operation in the direction of Pridnestrovia. The only thing they expect is when the Romania will bring their air defense system on the border with Moldova and maybe inside of Moldova, and they need to protect the Ukrainian offensive operation by the air defense system inside of Moldova, because they need to be sure if the Russians start some marine operation or helicopters or air attacks from Crimea, they need to have a lot of air defense system. They need to, let's say, to blame the Russians of crossing of air space of Moldova and to attack any air unit in the sky without any problem. So this is the thing that Ukrainians expect. And as soon as air defense system of Moldova will be completed, will be done, then the Ukrainians will start their offensive operation. Maybe they will wait a little bit before the fall of Bakhmut, because as we discussed yesterday, they need to have some media victory and they need to reduce the damage of losing of Bakhmut. So first they need to lose, and then they need to gain some victory in Moldova and Pridnestrovia, and this is the reason why the losses of Ukrainians on the Kherson bank is so high. There are a lot of Ukrainians in this area, and the Russians started attacking the Ukrainians' manpower in this area because maybe the Russians are planning to return back to Kherson, and now they're trying to attack and to reduce the Ukrainian manpower and warehouse in this area as much as possible, because as I understand, there are not much solutions how the Russians are able to do something in this area, and marine operation or helicopter air operation in this area is highly unlikely, or the Russians will have a lot of losses. And the possible solution is to do something maybe in Kherson, like to attack this area and to freeze and pin down the Ukrainians along the Moldova and Pridnestrovia border. I can't tell you exactly, but something the Russians are planning to do. Almost every single day they notifying Moldova about the upcoming provocation, and that the sanctions from the Russian side is going to be very tough for Moldovians and for Ukrainians. Furthermore, as you know, yesterday during the previous night, there is an airport, this one in Machulishi, the town that located on the south of Minsk. And yesterday there were a number of explosions in that town, and the Western sources and the Ukrainian sources, some Russian sources, are saying that the Belarusian partisans attacked the airport on the south of Minsk, and as a result of that attack, the one important and very expensive airplane was destroyed. But this is the version of Western countries, and this is the version of Ukrainian side. There were no official confirmation or no official information from Minsk, from Belarus, about that accident. There are no video or photo confirmation of destroyed those very expensive planes. If you remember, when the Ukrainians attacked the town the Russian airports in Saratov, Engels. The next day, the world published video and photo confirmation. The world press, Western press, about the satellite pictures of that airport, of destroyed planes and so on, of damaged planes and so on. But when talking about this area, there are still no evidence of any damage. So to tell the truth, you need to understand that for now there is no reason to believe that any airplane, aircraft, airship was destroyed on the airport in Machulishi. I would like to wait a little bit and to see the real improvements. Furthermore, yes, when talking about the local situation in Belarus, also Western sources are saying that Belarus special forces started something like counter-terrorist operation. But anyway, there were no official information about that. Maybe that was just irregular procedures. So you shouldn't believe everything that people say on from the Western sources. Yes, maybe there is some operation. Furthermore, the Belarus authorities published the photo of possible executor of that operation, possible, but they're also not saying that this is the guy who was involved or executed that operation. They just published a photo of a man, and they asked to be very careful, and if anybody has information about this man, to provide this information to government authorities or something like this. But as we discussed, this is maybe if there were attack and maybe the Belarus partisan managed to destroy some very important and very expensive airplane. Anyway, we understand that that was attacked not against that airport and against that airship. That was attack against the relations between Minsk and China and Peking. As you know, the president of Belarus tomorrow is going to fly to China, and they're planning to discuss something. And as we discussed many videos ago, I told you that China and Minsk are trying to create the mechanism, logistic, to move the production from China to Minsk, and from Minsk to support Russia with weapon. So they want to avoid, and they want to not to get under sanctions, but from the other side they want to help, and the only possible solution is to establish production in Belarus and to support Russia from Belarus. There will be a lot of races of airplanes, they will move a lot of parts, and the only thing that will be done in Belarus, they will just collect all their parts together and they will give you like a drones or maybe rockets, I don't know. But anyway, this is the thing that the president of Belarus and China leader is going to discuss during the next few days of meeting in China. And that was some kind of a warning from the Western countries. I believe that situation was completely controlled and created by the Western intelligence, and that was some kind of message. That was some kind of a message to the president of Belarus. If you want to start if you want to start working with China, you need to understand that this is not the last explosion on your territory, and from now on we, the Western countries, will continue attacking, or Ukrainians or something like this, we will continue attacking your infrastructure, military, by drones and so on. So this is the situation, and that was some kind of message to the president of Belarus not to enter this situation and not to develop the relationships with China. So that's about the situation with Belarus and Moldova, and that's it about Bakhmut. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day.